All right, let's get started. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Today's cancer care virtual seminar topic is how obesity and gut health impact cancer risk. My name is Annie Gebbe, and I'll be your host and moderator today. I'm an outreach coordinator for the Samaritan Cancer Resource Center. This event is brought to you by the Samaritan Cancer Resource Center. We partner with anyone touched by cancer to provide the support they need to live with strength, determination, and hope into the future. A couple housekeeping rules for today. This presentation is being recorded and will be available on the Samaritan YouTube channel in a couple of weeks. If you're not able to make it to the whole presentation today or would like to share it with a friend or family member, all microphones are muted and will remain muted during this session. And please use the questions or chat menu to type any questions or comments during the presentation. We will do our best to answer those through, and any questions that we aren't able to get to, we will follow up with you individually via email. Joining us today is Dr. Erika Vella from the Samaritan Weight Management Institute. Thank you so much for being with us today. It is now my pleasure to go ahead and turn it on over to you, and I will be waiting in the wings.
Excellent. All right, so there we go, show my screen. Okay, everyone, I'm Dr. Vella. You already saw my picture, but I am a bariatric surgeon here at Good Samaritan, and I've been asked to speak on the topic of what is the link between obesity and cancer. And I just couldn't be more excited to chat with you guys today because I am very, very passionate about obesity prevention and about the lifestyle changes that are really needed to help round out all of our internal metabolic, hormonal, and internal chemical processes. And so we're going to be going on a journey here, connecting all of the things that impact weight and impact inflammation in the body. And we're going to be connecting that back down to the very practical ways that we can change our diet and change our lifestyle. And then also where those two meet, which is the bacteria or the microbiome inside the human body. This is really where the environmental contributions of diet and lifestyle, how they play out in terms of our internal chemistry. And I love science, and I recognize that not everybody here on this webinar is going to have a scientific background or have a medical background, but I do hope that I have clearly explained things in a way that give you context to some of these medical terms. So obesity is associated with cancer risk. This is absolutely delineated in the scientific literature to the point where it's believed that obesity is now one of the leading risk factors for cancer and actually carries more weight, so to speak, no pun intended, and that obesity is contributing more and more these days to cancer risk, even more so than smoking. As smoking rates are declining, our obesity rates are climbing. And breast and colorectal cancer mechanisms are probably the most well-studied and pronounced. And in general, obesity is seen as a risk factor for all digestive organ malignancies and malignancies that are hormonally mediated, like breast cancers. The mechanisms here, I'm going to lower this, relating to obesity, I'll kind of fly through these, but it's believed that there are inflammatory chemicals. They're called cytokines. Cytokines help regulate whether we get a fever, whether we hurt, whether different immune cells in the body get triggered or accumulate in certain tissue sites, right? So I'm kind of highlighting here some of the physiology behind osteoarthritis or rheumatoid arthritis. But it's believed that just having excess adipose tissue or excess fat accumulation in organs, in the intra-abdominal space, in the liver, and in the muscle is what contributes to some of these inflammatory conditions in the body. There's also a really well marked out connection to insulin and insulin resistance or diabetes. And so the hormones that stimulate insulin is actually what we call a growth factor. So the more insulin that is in your body, the more insulin resistant a person is at lowering blood sugar. Basically, if insulin is just spiked and used often in the body, which can be impacted by how frequently we eat, not even necessarily how much sugar we eat, but just the frequency in which we eat. Every time we eat, we are more or less spiking an insulin response in the body. But insulin is a growth factor, and so it promotes other inflammatory pathways in the body and reduces our own ability to then screen and repair gene mutations, which is kind of the hallmark of how cancers form. And this is these insulin receptors have been found in tissue sites and also on cancer cells in breast, colon, lung, prostate, ovary, thyroid, etc. Right? So all of these organ sites are responsible for secreting a lot of hormones in the body. Another mechanism that has been kind of mapped out is this association between carrying excess body weight and then what that does to our sex hormones. So the more overweight a person is, the more likely they are to have elevated androgens. Androgens are the type of hormones that you have estrogen, then converted to testosterone, and kind of anywhere in between, estradiol specifically. But this is what's elevated in PCOS and can impact rates of low testosterone in men with obesity. So again, this excess body fat accumulation can affect these sex hormones, which can then affect some of these sex hormone related cancers. This is also connected to that insulin-like growth factor mechanism, which is why PCOS is often tackled or treated from a kind of a diabetes type management perspective. Another mechanism that, again, these are all interrelated mechanisms. They're not necessarily entirely unique, but these are just all of the chemical ways inside our body that obesity can promote cancer. Chronic low-grade inflammation and oxidative stress. And what this means is there are chemicals in our bloodstream that get secreted by fat cells that also get secreted when we have metabolic syndrome, so high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and also high blood sugar or type 2 diabetes. But all of these things work together and can promote other pro-inflammatory chemicals. Adiponectin, which is a chemical released from body fat cells, which is actually a good thing. It's an anti-inflammatory and insulin sensitizing chemical, but that operates inversely, so opposite another chemical that's made by our body fat cells called leptin. So it's believed that the more body fat you have, the higher the leptin content. The lower the body fat you have, the higher the adiponectin content. So in other words, lean versus what we call obese body types. And so there's just a really good correlation here. These are some of the biochemical markers that are being studied after bariatric surgery. So I am very pleased to announce that bariatric surgery has a 50% reduction in cancer development studied longitudinally. For every 20% reduction in body weight, you see an equal reduction in leptin. And leptin is that pro-inflammatory hormone, which means that adiponectin shines more. And then you get this 50% reduction in cancer. Sleep is also intimately related to how our bodies, I guess, communicate or signal insulin. So when we have sleep disruptions, it actually increases behaviorally our cravings for food that promote dopamine. And so dopamine is this brain chemical that tells us, oh yeah, that's good, we like it. It's a reward-seeking kind of neurochemical. And sugar and certain carbohydrates, I can think of like croissants from La Pâtissier, and that's probably my favorite dopamine-seeking carbohydrate. But if you've ever paid attention, whenever you get poor sleep the night before, you're more prone to seek these things out. And again, there's a chemical reason for doing so. A good night's sleep actually turns off this dopamine-seeking kind of behavior. But all of these disruptions in insulin and insulin signaling are kind of chronic manifestations of poor sleep and disruptions in circadian rhythms. In my practice, when we're just talking about obesity and being overweight, there is a direct correlation between night shift workers and weight gain. And I think that this is a big part of it. And then disruptions in the microbiome. And if you don't know yet what the microbiome is, I cannot wait to be the first one to introduce you to the subject. Dietary nutrients. So the food quality of our diets cannot be underestimated. And this is another cancer mechanism. When our foods are processed, they don't have fiber, they don't have antioxidants. Antioxidants are the colors that you see here on the screen, all the colors of the rainbow, all the vibrant fruits and vegetables, or essential fatty acids. And these are just nutritional components that exist in living, real food. These living, real food chemicals are absolutely necessary for us to have good insulin signaling, digestive hormone secretion, and they feed the microbiome as well. This is a schematic that I borrowed from a paper published in 2017, but it just kind of shows you, again, these different scientific names and labels associated with fat. So this enlarged or, swollen fat cell. So an adipose tissue is fat cells. And adipose, believe it or not, we have a given number of fat cells head to toe on our body. We were born with a given number. However, they can grow. Just like our cancers can grow, these cells can grow depending on the conditions put upon the body. So it's not that we're growing more fat cells, we're just growing bulkier, fattier adipose tissue. And so these are all of those inflammatory chemicals that are associated with it. Hypoxia means a low oxygen environment. And that's what happens when our body fat cells start to grow. The little capillaries in our bodies have a hard time oxygenating them, which then further also promotes some inflammation. This picture here on the right shows what a blood vessel kind of mapped out with these little tiny capillaries feeding oxygen and nutrients to tumor cells, and then how that gets back into the bloodstream. And so this is, metastasis is when a tumor will then spread throughout the body. Angiogenesis is where a tumor will actually promote the growth of new blood cells or new capillaries to feed it coming to it. And so there's just this connection of wherever there's cancer, there's an overload of all of these, pro-inflammatory cytokines. And in obesity is where we see these inflammatory cytokines first being made. So now I want to connect you to the microbiome, because the microbiome is this other scientific layer. And I say scientific, but it's biology, just because we're talking about things that we previously didn't understand as a society within the last, 50 or 100 years. They've been invisible, but they've been a part of our lives the whole time. In fact, I even have a slide coming up where I kind of delicately make the argument that our bacteria are our oldest living ancestors. If you have a more Darwinian kind of view of survival of the fittest and how different species of animals have evolved over time, you'll see from a different biological perspective that bacteria were the first living organisms on the planet. And depending on the conditions in which they're in and how they organize themselves in communities or ecosystems really impacts their behavior or their function. And so when we look at us as humans, inside our bodies, we have 100 trillion microorganisms that live in and on us. It's estimated that 95% of these bacteria, there are also other microorganisms, but again, you can't see them with the naked eye. but it's estimated that 95% of them live in our gut. And so because they live in our GI tract, they also live in our respiratory tract, they live in our mouth, but we are constantly making choices every day that impact them directly. Every time we eat food, every time we drink water, every time we exercise, every time we go to bed, every time we have intimacy with another person, we are more or less interacting with each other at this bacterial level. It's estimated that there are more microbes than there are stars in the Milky Way that inhabit our bodies. With the bacterial genetics, so there's a big study on, well, interesting, these are the types of bacteria that are in our body. This is the function of those bacteria in our body, and how the genetic material and all this biochemistry, chemical stuff that we're talking about, what they create, what they secrete, and how they interact with our own host human physiology, that the bacteria actually outnumber the human 150 to 1. So this really puts it in perspective of the importance that taking good care of your microbiome can have on your health outcomes. It's estimated that the inside of the human GI tract, especially the small intestine, if you were to cut it open and look at it, you'll see tiny finger-like projections, and those are called villi. Those finger-like projections, if you stretch it flat, you take up, the human gut has the same surface area as 2 tennis courts. So again, on this chemical kind of process, every time we eat, I have a bag of cherries here next to me. Every time I eat a cherry, I am chewing this vibrant red, juicy, sweet, tart, antioxidant full food. And I am using 2 surface areas of my entire GI tract to then absorb all of that biochemical goodness. There is also a consideration here that just because we're talking about bacteria and their genetics, there's also another fun fact that viruses outnumber the bacteria by 5 to 1. And viruses, again, this is kind of the mystery here. This is the dark matter of the universe that's inside your body. But with viruses, they can share genetic information to each other, mutate like that. That's what we're seeing with the coronavirus. They can also mutate with bacteria and share genetic information, then changing bacteria generations and then also changing itself. So there is a lot of very fast processing of data going on at the microscopic level in our bodies. And it does take subsequent generations and cell division in order for these changes to be mapped out in terms of our own genetic material. And that is really the crux of like how cancers can form, is that every time a cell gets ready to die, it makes a copy of itself. And different tissue sites in the human body do this in different time constraints, but every time it has to make a copy of itself, it's whether or not that copy can be made perfectly, whether it can be made imperfectly, or whether it can be made to promote cancer and malignancy. And so this control of this internal environment, obesity or not, all of these different mechanisms is really what I'm here to try to inspire you towards. This is really complicated, and if you don't have any scientific background, you're probably just like, whoa, what is that? But I just share this with you because of its complicated nature. Bacteria, so I'll just kind of walk you through it. This little pink row here at the top and this little pink row here at the bottom, this is representing your intestinal barrier. Everything here on the inside between those 2 pink dots is food, it's stool, it's bacteria. And what happens when we eat food is our food gets broken down by our own digestive enzymes and our own chemicals and the bacteria that live in our bodies. Then those bacteria break down the food and the fiber that we just ate. By the way, fiber is one of the most important things for you to lower inflammation in the body. This fiber then creates other chemicals. We mentioned the chemicals that are bad. The bad chemicals, these are those interleukins, those inflammatory things up here. They're all abbreviated. Just know that these are bad things that get triggered, that promote insulin resistance, promote obesity, promote cancer, promote other diseases. This isn't unique to cancer. But that is what happens when things don't go well. But when things do go well, and you're eating enough fiber, you're eating the right things, you're exercising, you're making healing chemicals. And it's not that you make them, it's that your bacteria make them. The bacteria in your gut makes these healing chemicals. Again, there's not going to be a quiz at the end of this, you don't need to know. But what happens is you get anti-inflammatory effects. You get promotion of good hunger, appetite, insulin sensitivity goes up. People don't have type 2 diabetes. Our brains function better. Our immune system isn't as reactive. We don't have arthritis. We don't have heart disease. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And it's just really exciting time to be in medicine. It's an exciting time to be an obesity surgeon because we're understanding these mechanisms more and more, which means we're hopefully going to get better targeted at our chemotherapies and are just at our overall approach. Again, I'm a bit of a purist, even though I'm a surgeon. I'm a unique surgeon where I really emphasize these lifestyle behaviors so that we can really try to reduce our risk of cancers, obesity, and all these metabolic diseases. So just some other fun facts here. Bacteria seem to control the way we absorb calories from our food, and the different types of bacteria that are living in our gut are actually connected to the control of weight gain. And so again, this is largely brain hormones telling us to eat, to drink, to evacuate our bowels, etc. But it's because of all this chemical signaling that goes on, the more our diet lacks really beneficial, colorful nutrients, the more hungry our bacteria seem for more food. And so there's this kind of paradox here where eating food that is very nutrient poor, we can say nutrient dense because maybe it's high calorie, but it lacks all the colors, it lacks all the fiber, it lacks all those essential fatty acids that only exist in real living food. It actually promotes weight gain and overfeeding because our bodies aren't getting what they want. Bad bacteria can create inflammation and disrupt hormones of metabolism. That's kind of what I was just showing you there. And then the bacteria and the genetics of these changes then become inheritable, which is also very interesting. So science is now mapping out certain adverse events that could happen to a certain population of people, like Jewish populations from internment camps or Irish famines. The kind of traumatic events of starvation and dietary restrictions are then now being inheritable or at least mapped out in subsequent generations from events like that, which is very interesting. And then just like I said, the cancers are now linked to disturbances in the gut microbiome. And I am just curious if anybody on this call believes in the mind-body connection. I think the cancer community is very well aware of the mind-body connection and are very aware of the coping strategies and even just the opportunity for self-reflection. The gut and the brain are connected, and it's because of the immune and the endocrine system that we really, as a human, experience that mind-body connection. And I'll tell you as a little example, when I was in medical school, I was experiencing a profound amount of stress, a little bit of personal PTSD from just some childhood trauma, paired with some very extraneous circumstances, 14 exams every 2 weeks, lots of pressure to perform, and just never really put myself through something like that before. The stress that I was feeling was definitely impacting my brain. It was impacting my sleep, right? I was studying all the time. I wasn't really taking care of myself. I didn't really know the best way to kind of cope with these things. And then what I was experiencing was a profound gut reaction. Digestion wasn't working as well. And then that impacted, again, microbiota and food choices, et cetera. And I really was this kind of like living, waking display of all of these functional gut problems paired with stress. And ultimately, I ended up getting diagnosed with an intestinal parasite. That parasite revealed that I wasn't absorbing nutrients the same way I should be. My diet was actually pretty good, but I wasn't absorbing nutrients the same way I was. And so because my digestion wasn't working very well, I didn't really have the internal anti-anxiety hormones, if you will, because we do make them inside our bodies. In fact, 95% of our serotonin, which is one of the major pathways for antidepressants, is made in the gut. And your antidepressants, frankly, don't work if you aren't making it internally yourself. But long story short, I cleaned up my gut, I cleaned up my stress, I cleaned up this whole picture, and I just really owe my current life, honestly, to me understanding these mechanisms and being able to take really good care of not only my mental health, but also my gastrointestinal health. So there's lots of windows of opportunity to address your microbiome, and this is all really well mapped out in the science. Your mother's gut environment, what bacteria were there, what was her diet like, what was her stress and environment like, is really important, because what happens to the mother can actually cross into the placenta. Your birth mode, so whether you were born by C-section or whether you were born vaginally, there was a study that came out last year, 2020, so 2 years ago, that followed children born by C-section in the years 1946 to 1948, and it followed them lifelong. And it published that if you were born by C-section, and practices might have been different back then, but if you were born by C-section, your risk of developing type 2 diabetes was, I want to say it was between 40 and 50%, just by being born by C-section. Over the long term of your life, you were that much more likely to develop type 2 diabetes. Now, if that doesn't kind of surprise you, again, what are we talking about here? We're talking about insulin resistance and the obesity connection being a huge, huge, huge risk factor for cancers. So I really think that maybe this topic could even be expanded on to where the insulin resistance, because you can have insulin resistance to type 2 diabetes without having obesity. The two do go hand in hand, but science is now suggesting that insulin resistance is actually the precursor to all of this in terms of that inflammatory kind of cascade. And if we can get our insulin regulation a little better under control, then we're going to have a healthier body weight, etc. Early childhood, so once that child's born, their diet, so their exposure to healthy food or unhealthy food, their exposure to, again, healthy breast milk from mom, or maybe not so healthy breast milk from mom. It all depends on what the mother is eating and how the mother's health is. Medications. I know it's quite common practice now to put some infants on Nexium, which is an antacid if they were to have digestive difficulty or reflux. And then exposures to stressful stimuli. And again, if we have time at the end, I'll share kind of what this brain down connection is, its impact of our stress response on the gut. Use of medications that damage gut microbiome barrier. So ibuprofen is one of the worst classes of medications that we can take. It actually pokes holes in the protective lining of the gut, which makes it that much easier for those inflammatory kind of chemicals to then get into the bloodstream and systemically cause more damage. And then lastly, again, more there on that stress thing. And I guess I'll just cut to the chase. But if we have a stress response that stimulates our adrenaline, what happens in real time is that there's this cascade of events. But at the gut cell, that same kind of gut barrier cell picture, there's receptors there for stress hormones. So when we feel stressed out, it actually breaks the junction that holds those cells together, and stress gives you leaky gut. And so I kind of have a quote out there that it's not the gluten. We can't blame gluten for all of our gut problems. We actually have to take responsibility for our stress response, but also acknowledge that your diet feeds your sense of self and feeds your stress response, but likewise, your ability to cope and internalize and regulate are also very codependent on how our gut functions. So it's this mind-body connection that makes us so uniquely human. Just to clear up some information or some terminology here, microbiota is the word that means the organisms themselves. Microbiome refers to the microorganisms, but the environment that they live in and the genomes or the genetic conditions of the environment. And so the microbiome is really all these chemicals, all these hormones, and how the system vehicles and hormones to then have function. And that is really the crux of what cancer is. It's, cells trying to replicate. They replicated imperfectly. And now our surrounding environmental conditions in the body at that tissue site are promoting cancer growth. Metabolomics, just for anybody that is curious, looks at the chemicals released by strains of bacteria that then have a given effect. And so like on that first slide where I showed you all those 3 major chemicals, those are called postbiotics. We have prebiotics, we have probiotics, we have postbiotics. Postbiotics are these chemicals or metabolites released from strains of bacteria or different tissue sites that confer a given effect. And they're really, really, really important. And you know what else is really important? You can't supplement them. Chemistry has tried, at least not yet. We really have to take care of our entire organism to have this process work, as our creator intended it to. There's another field of science here called metatranscriptomics. And the transcriptomics is the part of looking at how genetic material is then copied and then transferred to then express a gene or a function. And again, using technology that studies cancer is how we've been able to study in real time what the function of these bacteria are doing and its impact on the entire environment in the body. So, I told you I'm a little nutty about bacteria. They literally are our oldest living ancestors. And as you can see here, we are just on the slippery slope here towards obesity because we have so many societal and cultural, capitalistic junk food habits. But if we just kind of peel back the layers of, again, simple does not mean easy. I believe that's a Warren Buffett quote. But the body really is simple, and it responds simply to food, to water, to love, to kindness, to regulation, and to exercise. And if we keep doing those basics, we are going to be dramatically better off. There is a theory of how bacteria became evolved into other higher architectural organisms. So bacteria really were our first living creatures on the planet. And it's believed, again, this is just a theory, but it's believed that one bacteria swallowed the other. And so if you've ever heard that a mitochondria, which exists in all of our cells as humans, exists in most living creatures, but your mitochondria is an ancient bacteria that now is the energy producing feature inside every one of our cells. And so just take this endosymbiotic theory and just kind of keep extrapolating it, almost like a Russian doll kind of theory. So let's talk a little bit about our human gut microbiome. Oh, good. It's only 12:30. And by the way, if you guys have any questions, just type them in the chat as we go. And yeah, hopefully we have a really stimulating discussion afterwards. So, Mom, I'm currently pregnant, so this speaks a lot to me, but we have a very important role in preparation for child rearing, but also throughout pregnancy. And it's believed, remember that C-section risk, C-section increases your risk of insulin resistance by 40, I think it was 43 or 47%. and increases your risk of diabetes. Our ability to not have a dental infection and not have a urinary tract infection. Studies have shown that if a mother has tooth abscess, cavity, or a UTI, or any real infection, of their body, that whole response will actually seed the amniotic fluid and promote what we call dysbiosis. Dysbiosis just means that the bacterial environment in your body is not working optimally for your health, and the presence of bacteria from either one of these sites in the amniotic fluid is associated with preterm birth. Preterm birth is associated with more C-sections. So again, it's just important to, again, good dental care, good diet, all the simple ways to take care of ourselves. So we mentioned the placenta as a prenatal factor for how microbiome can impact our health. Modes of delivery, so whether a baby's born C-section or vaginally. When a baby's born vaginally, it makes contact with very specific bacteria that only grow within that last final month of gestation, so that the baby makes contact with the vaginal canal and even makes contact with colon organisms. Hopefully most people on this call are mature and old enough to understand that, yeah, when a mother is pushing a baby out vaginally, a lot of times stool comes out, or at least gets in and around the vicinity, and that baby's first contact with microorganisms come from those two body site locations. Gestational age is also an important factor, because if the baby is born at term, then the baby can then digest and drink milk appropriately. But if they're born too premature, they don't really have that developed yet, and then they have to be supplemented with different types of formula. All those postnatal factors that we kind of mentioned about how they were fed, who they lived with, their geographical location. So there's certain microorganisms that are very specific to different regions of the world, different ethnicities of people that live in these different versions of the world. And then there's also been a fascinating connection detailing that if you have a pet in the home, specifically a dog that goes indoor, outdoor, or a cat, then that also decreases the rate of allergies and asthma in C-section babies. Yes. So anyway, lots of really cool environmental connections there, all based on our exposure to the right kinds of bugs at the right kinds of time. Oh yeah, 46%. Good. I did put this in here. So I told you this is that study that looked at the longitudinal risk factor associated with being born by C-section. Yeah, meaning you nearly have a 1 in 2 chance of developing type 2 diabetes simply because you were born by C-section. And I take this with a grain of salt because while it is a prospective longitudinal study, I think we even have more things to consider now. We use antibiotics routinely now for C-sections, whereas in the 1940s we didn't. And then also, now that we understand these mechanisms more, I think just because you had a C-section, you still have all this ample opportunity to then improve your risk by taking good care of yourself, right? Versus, not knowing this information and then continuing to eat Kellogg cereal and Cheez-It crackers and McDonald's. All right, so a little bit more here about the gut and the gut microbiome, but your gut actually has the largest collection of neurons in the body. There's actually more neurons, more nerve cells in the gut than there is in your brain. And likewise, it's also the largest collection of lymph nodes. So here you have your immune system, and you have this neuron system, which uses serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, right? All of these neurotransmitters that we thought were only for our brain, this interconnection between the two is happening right here at the gut level. Our gut brain or enteric brain makes the majority of the serotonin in the body. And for every one nerve going from the brain to the gut, there's actually 9 neurons going from the brain to the central nervous system or from the gut to the brain. So this is a quote from Peter Levine, who's one of my favorite trauma psychiatrists, and he just says that your guts actually have more to say. And so here's kind of that, again, explanation of that gut-brain connection, that mind-body connection. Here I was, this super stressed out medical student. I was eating a relatively good diet, but my stress was impacting my digestion significantly. So over the last 10, 15 years or so, by the way, I graduated medical school 10 years ago, this basic science research was not published. It was not common knowledge. I had no real kind of science to explain or to really connect my scientific brain with what I was feeling and experiencing. But the vagus nerve is a two-lane superhighway carrying information from the brain to the gut, from the gut to the brain. And I never learned this in med school. We thought that the vagus nerve was just regulating breath, regulating heart rate, and helping your body digest food. I was never told that it was carrying information from my organ systems back up to my brain. Now it makes sense. And in that regard, I did study and did know about the autonomic nervous system. So this is how we're going to start overlapping that sense of regulation and that sense of stress. So autonomic means that this is the part of your nervous system that works automatically. It's instructed to keep you alive. It alerts you to danger. It allows you to recognize and find safety. It allows us to internalize our own feelings of how I am feeling. And it also allows us to recognize and offer support for others in need. And again, I think as a parent, this is really obvious. You know, you got a little kid who's, crying for whatever reason, and you sit down, you put your hand on their back, and you change the tone of your voice, and you kind of coo them to a point where they feel safe again. Humans are really unique in this way, where we co-regulate each other, but we also develop neurologically ways to self-regulate ourselves. And so there's a lot of social engagement, and really safety is kind of the key word here. There is this concept in stress physiology, or just in physiology in general, which looks at how much stress is helpful and useful versus how much is too much and toxic. And this is where, as humans, we can exist on any spectrum here of parasympathetic, which is rest and digest, or sympathetic nervous system, which is I can exercise, I can get out of bed, or I can run and fight from that lion, tiger, or bear. Both of these scenarios can exist along a continuum, and both of these scenarios are necessary to have healthy function of our body. But when we get really over-tipped in one direction or the other, a couple of things happen. The parasympathetic nervous system can actually make our heart rate slow way down, and our blood pressure can drop. And this is what's referred to as fainting, or passing out. And sometimes people can pass out when they see a needle, or they see blood, or any number of things. And then the sympathetic system, again, is there to remind us that we don't have to put up with this. We can say no, we can fight back. But too much sympathetic overdrive, we can't sleep, we feel anxious. We're not digesting our food appropriately. So hormesis is what is beneficial and what is toxic. And what microbiome science has shown is that when your nervous system is at any toxic level, things kind of shut down, and it contributes to inflammation. It contributes to all of these other kind of not so simple, but simple things that our bodies experience. There's the reason I bring up the nervous system is because of that vagus nerve and that two-lane superhighway. So like I said, there's 9 nerves going from the gut back to the brain. This is how they're connected. Again, these are the representations here of your gut cells, your gut lining. These are those little finger-like villi projections. If we stretch it flat, would be the surface area of a tennis court. This EEC stands for enteroendochromatin cell. Total mouthful, but this is the type of cell that makes and regulates serotonin, captures it, and then puts it into the nervous system here. And so these are brain-like cells that exist in the gut level that are then carrying this information from food, from bacteria, those postbiotics, those inflammatory adipokines, etc. It's capturing those and conveying that information across the cell barrier and putting it back up to the brain. I mentioned that the immune response to stress is quite catastrophic. And so I think it's really important when we think about insulin resistance, obesity, and the stress-cancer connection and how our gut microbiome functions. In order to keep inflammation to a minimal at the systemic level, we really need to pay attention to the stress piece as well. There's a lot of those similar inflammatory cytokines that I mentioned at the very beginning that are associated with poor microbial environments and what we call leaky gut. Essentially, our stress reaction causes leaky gut. And there's also needs to be a recognition here that not all bacteria are bad, right? So just because, you know, we have a sniffle or we can't hear out of our ears doesn't mean we necessarily need antibiotics for those things. So there's been this shift from all bacteria are pathogens and bad to now recognizing that actually bacteria are symbiotic. And what symbiotic means is that they live in us for a reason. And if we can live our lives in a way that keeps them happy, then we are inherently going to be happy as well. Bacteria are inherently opportunistic, which means that they aren't really passive participants in their environment. If they are programmed to have a given function and the environmental conditions change or promote a function, they're going to do it. And so that's where dietary changes have a big impact. And that's where getting the stress response under control, again, can have a really, really big impact. Yeah, this was published in this Digestive Disease Science Journal in 2011, but your microorganisms sense host chemistry, just like the gut cell had a reaction when it sensed the stress hormones. The gut microbes themselves can also change their genetic function based on what hormones are circulating through our body at any given time, which is pretty neat. And how bacteria do this is it's through like text messaging and Bluetooth. It's like, you know, they get that amber alert in the body and they all kind of react to it. Science is calling this telesensing, and it's where bacteria can intercept host signals or our own kind of stress response. And then they capture those changes, and it's known that within 6 hours of a significant stressful event, maybe a car accident or whatever have you, some people are so sensitive to these epigenetic responses that they get diarrhea, that the diarrhea could be E. coli, which are natural organisms in our body, but they can get into the bloodstream and they can cause sepsis or you can get a blood infection with bacteria. Quorum sensing is where different colonies of bacteria can then also, like a little wave or a little Bluetooth signal, but how they can then secrete a molecule, which then the entire community can then receive that information and then change. The other factor here is bacteria reproduce really quickly, even more quickly than our own DNA can. So there's genome changes every subsequent generation of bacterial population, seen or witnessed in as little as 20 minutes. And science first studied this back in the 50s. So I would imagine that whatever species they studied in the 50s is probably different for all the other species of bacteria that we've since identified or observed. There are a lot of opportunities for these bad bacteria to create inflammation, as we have just previously mentioned. And these are also opportunities for us to then intervene. And we can intervene in this way no matter where we are in our life cycle. I like to remind people about the anatomy of digestion and how important it is to properly digest our food. It's important to make sure that we're sitting down to eat a meal. It's important to make sure that we're not eating while we're stressed or distracted. It's important that we chew our food until our food is adequately chewed up. It mixes with digestive enzymes in the mouth, and then it also helps stimulate secretions in the stomach. And then once received in the stomach, again, you want to make sure you're still in that rest and digest kind of state, because you need your hormones and your digestive enzymes to then appropriately mix with your food. The small intestine really does require this parasympathetic tone. It also requires that the integrity of the mucus layer is intact, which means you don't want to take medicines like ibuprofen or aspirin or naproxen or Relieve. And you want to eat a diet that's really high in fiber. Most people don't get enough fiber, but we need on average 30 to 50 grams of fiber a day if we want to have no metabolic disease and really lower our risk of cancer and have a healthy body weight. Digestive enzymes are really important, and then all of these things work together to regulate how quickly does food come into your mouth and then exit out your body in the form of a bowel movement. The kind of normal range for how much time it takes is about 24 hours. Food should take about, it should go through the small intestine in about 2, but it should go through the colon in about another 20. This here, I'm just going to highlight the gut barrier integrity and kind of what that mucus layer means and how it's so important. So intestinal permeability, this is what leaky gut means, and this is just another schematic. The picture on the left shows healthy gut cells all sitting right next to each other, absorbing nutrients from the inside of the bowel and then transporting that across to the bloodstream. Whereas the right half of the picture shows what it looks like when you have all those inflammatory chemicals beating up on those cells, actually hurting them, and then also having leaky gut or those tight junctions between the cells broken. Again, our stress response can do this. Not having enough fiber, enough nutrients to build the protective layer can do this. Having the wrong types of bacteria in the lumen can do this, etc. There's a lot of different things that can go on here. The gut cells really absorb nutrients here at the brush border, and these tight junctions here are what keep the particles out. This is an electron micrograph. This green stuff here is the mucus layer, this protective mucus layer. And fiber is the only way to grow a protective mucus layer. And taking medicines in the NSAID class, ibuprofen, Aleve, naproxen, aspirin, break this. They actually stop your body from being able to grow a healthy mucus layer, which is why those medicines are associated with ulcers, both in the stomach and in the small intestine. So fiber, don't take NSAIDs. You're going to have a pretty healthy gut. And there's also these other environmental factors for gut microbes. So depending on where we're talking about in the gut environment, whether it's stomach, proximal or upper small intestine, middle small intestine, lower small intestine, and the whole colon environment, this is determined on how much oxygen is present in the environment and also how much acid is present in the environment. And so this is why taking antacids chronically is not a good thing for the gut. Taking chronic pain medicine is not a good thing for the gut. Chronic pain medicine slows down the emptying, which means that it can get kind of like almost like an algae bloom can happen in your body, etc. So these are just, again, some other considerations to work on. If you have to take these medicines for whatever reason, there are ways that you can, again, optimize or mitigate some of the negative side effects. Again, just the stress response, hopefully that makes a little more sense to you now. And I think, okay, we have like 5 more minutes left. I don't know, you can tell me if we're running out of time. I have a few more slides left here that just kind of speak a little bit more to this mind-body connection, because our autonomic nervous system can get alerted by so many different variables. Worry, fear, alarm, maybe we had unpleasant communication with, somebody we work with or somebody we love. Maybe our body got hurt, maybe we had surgery. Loud noises like big booms, feeling chased, feeling hunted, feeling attacked, feeling held down. There's a story about a woman having PTSD because her older brother used to chase her around the house and hold her down to tickle her. Whenever our bodies are screaming no, and we're not being listened to or honored, that is really what creates this sort of like traumatic, stressful stimuli to the body. And I bring this up because, again, my personal experience in medical school, pretty normal kind of stuff, nothing that, overly traumatic, as they say. Yet my body and my stress response were telling me a completely different story, and it really impacted my gut. Stress appraisal is something that our brain is really good at, and it's a layered experience from our past experiences, our memories, instincts, and emotions. And then we have our thinking brain. This one is managed by fear, response-based, so how our frontal lobe thinks that we need to either have restraint or behaviorally interact. And then you have your hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus is the part of you that is the automatic kind of place. And that is where we have the hypothalamic pituitary axis and the vagus nerve. And this is just where all of those hormones that we really have no control over take shape and then interact with the rest of our body and biochemistry. This hypothalamic axis can then take in that sensory environment, that threat appraisal, and then determine whether or not it's a scene of safety or whether or not it's a scene of threat. And with threat, that's when we get that release of those hormones, and then those hormones then interact on our adrenal glands, which are below the diaphragm and in our body, and that's where we get this like excessive stress hormone, cortisol kind of production. When we have this systemic stress hormone response, all of those same inflammatory chemicals that we're linking obesity, cancer, run rampant. And so this can increase our risk of blood clotting, stroke, heart attack, arthritis, autoimmune conditions, cancers, right? Broken record here. And this is a lot of information, but this is basically my summary of how the gut cells listen to all these things going on in the body, and then how the immune system then reacts and then inputs those changes on the gut level. And then the gut bacteria and the food particles then start, the leaky gut, you start taking in undigested food particles. Your immune system will then start to react to whatever foods you're eating regularly in this state of physiology compromise. And so that's why we see gluten sensitivity. That's why we see soy, dairy sensitivity, because traditionally American diets, we're eating that stuff every day. So it's another kind of tidbit to why eating a variety of foods, especially whole, colorful foods, is really helpful and can help prevent your body from feeling this kind of like level of attack. Again, one more, just wow, how complicated this looks. But again, it is really taking care of ourselves can still be simple, regardless of how complicated or uneasy it can feel. This was just a study that actually documented this corticotropin stress hormone thing. And what they did is they stressed rats. They put rats in a beaker of water and made them swim. And then they tested their corticotropin hormone release. And then they monitored what effect it had on the body. And rats' stress, so by the way, lab rats don't have a good microbiome. It's like they've been on antibiotics and fed a very not great diet, and they're all genetically similar. But just this one condition of stress induced colitis in them. Colitis is where your gut, your colon gets really inflamed. And I see this a lot in my patient population, especially as people age. I've kind of said all this already. So what is a healthy gut-brain axis? Being present and alert to stressful stimuli doesn't mean we have to be looking for it, just means we have to be really open to where those things are. We need to learn how to regulate our own stress response. We can do this through meditation, we can do this through exercise, we can do this through conversation, and again, good sleep and good diet. We can start to really honor our parasympathetic nervous system to support our digestive function. And then once we have a healthy gut microbiota, that balance promotes anti-inflammatory, anti-cancer, improved gut barrier function, etc. in the body, and we just feel all around much, much, much better. These are more mechanisms here linking all the gut microbiome stuff to cancer and neurodegenerative diseases and immune diseases. Butyrate is one of those postbiotic healing chemicals that increasing butyrate in your body is as simple as eating more fiber. And so every time we eat, our microbes eat. And that's really kind of my takeaway message here. So with that, I'm going to stop and I am going to open up the floor for questions. I think I can stop sharing.
Thank you so much. That was so informative. Let's go over to the questions. Anyone that needs to log off for other reasons, I can follow up with you via email for your questions if you're not able to stay for those. Let's just get right into it. Let's see here.
Did I put you as the right, is this Brooke speaking?
This is Annie. Let's see.
Annie, okay. So let me see. I don't know. There we go. Okay, good.
Okay, excellent. I'm just going to leave up this slide with our upcoming events for everyone while we go over the questions. Did you say 30 to 50 grams of fiber per day? Can you please confirm that many grams?
I did say that. Now the American Dietary Guidelines suggest 25 is sufficient, but in metabolic disease, 30 to 50 is actually preferred, especially when you're talking about prevention of colon cancer. And colon cancer mechanisms, people who eat 30 to 50 grams per day have the highest levels of that circulating postbiotic chemical butyrate. Butyrate is actually a special chemical. It acts like, like humans need, we do need glucose, or should I say sugar, to fuel our cells. And that's what your body's trying to do, is trying to convert everything we eat into a form of sugar so that we can make energy. Well, at the gut level, the colon cell uses butyrate exclusively for energy. And so depending on how much butyrate you have, depends on how inflammatory your colon environment is, and your rate of colon cancer. So yeah, more fiber is better. And it doesn't mean that you need to just eat 50 grams of fiber tomorrow. It is wise that you slowly increase the amount of fiber you take in to work up to it. That way you're not getting all bloated and constipated, and it can be uncomfortable to eat that much fiber if you're not used to it. But yeah, more fiber is better.
Good to know. Those are the magic numbers, 30 to 50. Okay. What is your opinion or thoughts on vegetarian diet and inflammation reduction?
Yeah, I would say in general, I can't criticize animal protein. I don't come from that lens. I think there's many, many, many benefits to eating animal protein. Vegetarian diets, as long as any diet that anybody is on is eating enough whole grains, enough beans, enough lentils, enough nuts and seeds, enough fruits and vegetables, I think that there can be some wiggle room for whether or not you want to eat animal protein or not. And that's more consistent with like plant-based diets. There are some people that really think all animal proteins are just really inflammatory and really toxic, but I think that it's a disservice to say that in isolation without proper attention to all of these things that really promote that anti-inflammatory state at the biochemical level, which is just to eat more fiber, more plants, more colorful fruits and vegetables.
Great. Have you done any research or have knowledge on how conventional produce grown with GMOs and pesticides affect the microbiome versus heirloom or organic produce?
Yeah, it's terrible. GMO, I would say just in isolation, GMOs alone, I don't know. But the problem with GMO use is that they are genetically modified so that you can use unlimited types of pesticides. But yes, organically grown produce, it all comes down to the soil. So a lot of our microbiome, a lot of our probiotics in nature were never pill form, right? Humans have been on this planet for a really, really long time. We've never before needed for survival to eat a capsule full of these probiotic bacteria. Instead, what really worked best was this acknowledgement that soil diversity and plant diversity and eating foods directly from an organic, natural, wild kind of food source. They have bacteria on their roots, they have bacteria on their stems, and so by eating good dirt, we were actually able to get all of the kind of microbiome probiotics that we ever needed. The prebiotic being the food source themselves, the cabbages, the cauliflowers, the carrots, you know, all of that. But the probiotic organisms really kind of come from the soil and live on the plants. And that's why, as an example, I've made my own sauerkraut from my own cabbage grown at home. And it ferments faster, it ferments better than, say, cabbage I bought at the grocery store, whether it was organic or not. So in a nutshell, yes, pesticides is really soil depleting. And there's a direct, association with the rates of obesity in this country, with the use of pesticides in this country. And whether it's causal or not, I think it's multifactorial. But in general, those things are very destructive to the microbial environment. Great questions, guys.
Yeah, how do you suggest dealing with or mitigating negative effects of chronic stress when you're in situations like medical school?
Yeah, okay. It was hard. I think that, always just practicing the basics of taking really good care of yourself. Meditation for me has become a nice thing. And when I'm consistent with it, it's preventative from stress as well. Exercise, I'm a very kind of able-bodied person, but exercise for me has always been a wonderful outlet. And I didn't share any of the data with you today, but exercise is like that stress response in training. So you are activating your sympathetic response, but you're doing it within that hormesis kind of triangle. So as soon as you stop exercising, as soon as your heart rate comes down, your breathing rate comes down. It's like you've just exercised your right to feel stress, and then you've regulated yourself to come back down. And it's just amazing. At the gut level as well, it changes. So instead of having the cortisol over cortisol, corticotropin releasing hormone kind of response of like, I'm not in control of this unsafe situation, you're promoting safety through motion. And so there's a lot of really good microbiome benefiting kind of chemical responses that happen after exercise. And one of the most interesting kind of data to support that was that the gut environment of runners is actually conditioned to help them metabolize lactic acid more quickly. So again, your microbiome will respond to whatever environmental conditions you put it under to your benefit. So the microbiome actually helps shape athletes' ability to then train and recover from exercise as well.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. I think in the interest of time, we're going to wrap up here. If you have any pending, if there are any pending questions or anyone comes up with questions after this, please feel free to reach out to us. I'm putting our information, our contact information up on the screen right now. Samaritan Cancer Resource Center can be reached by phone, email. We now have a Facebook and Instagram and a monthly newsletter. Those are the best ways to know about our upcoming events and what we have going on. So please follow us and email us with questions if you have any. That's cancerresourcecenter@samhealth.org, and we'll be sure to get back to you. I have the upcoming events up here. We have a sun safety and skin cancer prevention event this Friday. Please reach out to us about registering for that. And Arts Care is resuming some in-person events coming up in June, so please join us. We did questions. All right. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Special thanks to Dr. Vella for being here. That was so interesting. Sounds like maybe we should do a part 2 at some point. Really appreciate your participation, and I hope everyone has a great day. Keep a lookout for our post survey, and please fill that out with questions and comments and how we can improve. You may now disconnect.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.